welcome to the Survival Horror Ambience channel, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs into oblivion. Subscribe today and embrace the darkness with us. Now back to our story. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the Seafarer, a majestic cruise ship, glided away from the bustling port city. On the upper deck, passengers gathered, their faces alive with anticipation for the journey ahead. Among the crowd, Damien, the ship's charismatic event planner, moved with effortless charm. With a mischievous glint in his eye and a confident smile, he greeted passengers as they boarded, making them feel instantly at ease. "Welcome aboard, folks. You're in for the time of your lives," Damien declared, flashing a grin at a group of excited teenagers. Clay and Alona, a young couple celebrating their anniversary, stepped onto the ship hand in hand. Clay, a software engineer with an adventurous spirit, eagerly scanned the horizon, while Alona, a nurse known for her compassionate nature, admired the ship's elegant design. "Can you believe we're doing this, Clay? A whole week of relaxation," Alona said, squeezing Clay's hand as they made their way to their cabin. Captain Rodriguez, a stoic figure with a military background, stood at the helm, his experienced hands guiding the ship into open waters. He surveyed the scene with a watchful eye. His priority was always the safety and well-being of his passengers. "Smooth sailing so far, Captain?" a crew member asked, approaching him with a cup of coffee. The captain nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "For now, but we'll need to keep a close eye on the weather forecast." Dr. Emily White, the ship's physician, made her rounds, her calm demeanor reassuring those she passed. With a gentle smile, she offered words of welcome to nervous travelers and reassurance to those prone to seasickness. "Feeling a bit queasy, Mrs. Jenkins? Don't worry, it's perfectly normal. I'll bring you something to settle your stomach," Dr. White said, placing a comforting hand on the elderly woman's shoulder. As the ship set sail, the passengers' backgrounds and personalities began to emerge. The Johnson family, with their 2 young children in tow, bubbled with excitement at the prospect of their first cruise. "Daddy, look, we can see dolphins," exclaimed little Lily, pointing excitedly at the playful creatures frolicking in the ship's wake. Meanwhile, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, a retired couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, exchanged loving glances as they watched the sunset from the deck. "In all our years together, I never thought we'd be on a cruise like this," Mrs. Chen said, leaning into her husband's embrace. In the corner of the ship's lounge, a group of college friends, including thrill-seeker Alex and bookish introvert Lisa, laughed and reminisced as they planned their adventures for the trip. "Skydiving in the Bahamas, anyone?" Alex suggested, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Throughout it all, Damien orchestrated the evening's welcome party with flair, ensuring that every passenger felt welcomed and entertained. "Cheers to new adventures and unforgettable memories," Damien declared, raising his glass as the music played and the champagne flowed. As the festivities continued into the night, the excitement of the voyage ahead filled the air, promising adventure, relaxation, and unforgettable memories. Chapter 2. The Outbreak. As the Seafarer continued its voyage, whispers of a strange illness began to circulate among the passengers and crew. Reports of people falling mysteriously ill spread like wildfire, casting a shadow over the once festive atmosphere on board. Clay, seated with Alona in the ship's dining hall, pushed his salad aside with a grimace. "I should have stuck to salads. This ship's food is questionable," he muttered, glancing around at the other diners. Alona shot him a concerned look. "Clay, don't be paranoid. It's probably just a bug going around. We'll be fine," she reassured him, though her worry lingered beneath the surface. Damien, passing by their table with a tray of drinks, caught snippets of their conversation. "No need to worry, folks. These things happen on cruises all the time. It's nothing serious," he chimed in with a reassuring smile before continuing on his way. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez received troubling reports from the ship's medical staff about a growing number of passengers falling ill. He furrowed his brow, his concern deepening with each new case. "Unusually, we can't seem to reach headquarters," he remarked to his first mate, his voice tinged with worry. "But let's keep this under wraps for now. We don't want to cause panic among the passengers." As the day wore on, the situation aboard the Seafarer grew increasingly dire. More and more passengers slipped into a sudden and unexplained coma-like state, their bodies limp and unresponsive. Crew members worked frantically to contain the outbreak, isolating the affected individuals and implementing strict sanitation protocols throughout the ship. But despite their efforts, the illness continued to spread, casting a pall of fear and uncertainty over the once vibrant cruise liner. As night fell over the ship, enveloping it in darkness, the true extent of the outbreak remained shrouded in mystery, a silent menace lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to reveal its devastating consequences. Chapter 3: Panic on Board. As the day wore on, whispers of concern spread like wildfire among the passengers of the Seafarer. More and more people were collapsing on deck, their sudden comas sending shockwaves of fear throughout the ship. That night, as the ship sailed through the dark waters, the tension on board reached a fever pitch. Passengers huddled together in small groups, exchanging worried glances and anxious murmurs. In the captain's quarters, Captain Rodriguez and his first mate anxiously monitored the ship's communications. Suddenly, the crackling of the radio cut through the silence, followed by a garbled transmission. "Outbreak! Emergency! Quarantine!" The voice on the radio was barely discernible, lost amidst the static. Before they could make sense of the message, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air. Without hesitation, Captain Rodriguez and his first mate rushed to the source of the commotion, their hearts pounding in their chests. "What in God's name was that?" Captain Rodriguez demanded. "I don't know, but it sounded like trouble," the first mate replied, his voice tight with tension. They arrived on the scene to find chaos unfolding before their eyes. Little Lily, the Johnson family's young daughter, was attacking her mother with a ferocity that defied comprehension. Her small frame convulsed with wild, animalistic movements as she ravaged her mother's neck like a rabid animal. "Get a medical team here now and secure the area," Captain Rodriguez ordered. "Aye, Captain, I'll radio for backup," the first mate responded, his voice urgent. The captain and his first mate stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the horrifying scene unfolding before them. "Captain, what in blazes is happening here?" the first mate asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to contain this before it spreads any further," Captain Rodriguez replied, his tone grave. More screams echoed from other parts of the ship, signaling that whatever had afflicted Lily was spreading rapidly among the passengers. At that moment, as panic and chaos gripped the Seafarer, Captain Rodriguez knew that they were facing a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered before. And as the night wore on, the true horror of the outbreak would reveal itself in ways that would shake the very foundation of the ship and its inhabitants. Chapter 4: Descent into Madness. Chaos engulfed the Seafarer as Captain Rodriguez fought to contain the outbreak. He made the difficult decision to quarantine half of the ship, sealing off sections in an attempt to prevent the further spread of the sickness. Panic-stricken passengers and crew members scrambled for safety, their screams echoing through the corridors. In the medical bay, the first aid staff worked tirelessly to treat the afflicted, unaware of the danger lurking within their midst. Little Lily's bite had infected one of the nurses, and the sickness spread like wildfire, claiming more victims with each passing moment. On the communication system, all they heard was madness, desperate pleas for help, frantic cries for loved ones, and the sound of chaos consuming the once orderly ship. With no other options left, Captain Rodriguez made the difficult decision to head for the nearest mainland to seek help. The fate of the Seafarer now rested on his shoulders as he navigated the ship through treacherous waters, every moment fraught with uncertainty. Meanwhile, in his cabin, Damien, the charming event planner, found himself with a stunning redhead beauty, seeking solace from the chaos outside. "What's happening out there? It sounds like the ship's falling apart," Damien wondered aloud. "I don't know, but it doesn't sound good," the woman replied, her brown eyes wide with fear. As they pondered the screams echoing through the ship, a knock on the door shattered their moment of tranquility. Who could that be at this hour? Damien mused, his brow furrowed with concern. Opening the door cautiously, Damien was met with the sight of an infected man rushing towards him, blood streaming from his eyes and mouth. "Oh my God, what's happening?" the woman exclaimed, her voice trembling with fear. "Get back, stay away from him," Damien commanded, pushing the woman to safety. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Damien barely dodged the infected man's outstretched arms. In a moment of desperation, Damien struck the man, knocking him unconscious before he could inflict harm. "We need to get out of here now," Damien urged, his voice urgent. But as he turned to reassure the woman, horror dawned upon him. The infected man had bitten her during the struggle, and she was now showing signs of infection. "No, this can't be happening," Damien muttered to himself, his heart sinking with despair. The woman's once vibrant demeanor now faded, replaced by the telltale signs of the sickness taking hold. Her eyes glazed over, her breathing shallow. I feel strange," she murmured, her voice trembling. Knowing that time was of the essence, Damien quickly locked them in his room, barricading the door to prevent any further harm. With a heavy heart, he made a solemn promise to return. "I'll come back for you, I promise," Damien said, his voice filled with determination. Leaving the cabin behind, Damien set forth on a perilous journey through the dimly lit corridors, each step weighed down by the burden of his newfound responsibility. The ship seemed to groan and creak around him, as if it were a living, breathing entity consumed by the darkness that now enveloped it. His sole mission was to find the captain and seek help before it was too late. Chapter 5. The Abyss. The once orderly corridors of the Seafarer now resembled a scene from a nightmare. Chaos reigned supreme as the contagion spread with merciless efficiency. Damien navigated through the labyrinth of madness, his senses on high alert, every shadow concealing a potential threat. "People are turning everywhere," Damien muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of screams. In a desperate bid for survival, he was forced to defend himself against an infected man, the sickening sound of flesh tearing and bone crunching as he struck the fatal blow. "I didn't want to do this," Damien whispered, his hands trembling as he surveyed the carnage before him. Blood and viscera painted the walls, a macabre tapestry of horror that bore witness to the ship's descent into madness. As he pressed on, his footsteps muffled by the cacophony of screams and the sickening squelch of decaying flesh underfoot, Damien's resolve wavered. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. The infected now outnumbered the uninfected, their frenzied movements akin to rabid animals, flesh hanging off their emaciated frames, eyes glazed over with primal hunger. Damien's stomach churned at the sight, bile rising in his throat as he struggled to maintain his composure. He moved with stealth, every movement calculated to avoid detection. "Stay quiet, stay hidden," Damien whispered to himself, his words a mantra of survival. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a nauseating reminder of the horrors that lurked around every corner. With bated breath, Damien willed himself to remain calm, his hand inching towards the makeshift weapon at his side. In a flash of movement, he darted past the infected horde, their guttural snarls fading into the distance as he made his escape. As he rounded a corner, Damien came face to face with a group of infected, their bloodshot eyes locking onto him with predatory intent. "I have to keep moving," Damien thought, his heart hammering in his chest as he fought the urge to flee. With a final burst of adrenaline, Damien knew that the battle was far from over. "The infected still roam the ship," Damien muttered, his voice filled with grim determination, for he knew that the fate of the Seafarer rested in his hands, and he would fight until his last breath to see it through. Chapter 6. Amidst the Chaos. Alona and Clay, their hearts pounding with fear, stumbled upon Damien amidst the chaos that engulfed the ship. Relief flooded their faces as they realized they weren't alone in this nightmare. "Damien!" Alona cried out, her voice a mixture of relief and desperation. "Thank goodness we found you!" Clay exclaimed, his eyes wide with fear. Damien's expression mirrored their own relief, though it was tinged with the grim reality of their situation. "Alona, Clay, we need to get to the bridge," Damien urged, his voice urgent. Nodding in agreement, the trio set off through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. But their journey was far from uneventful. Crazed passengers infected with the sickness lurched towards them, their eyes vacant and mouths frothing with madness. Alona and Clay's screams mingled with those of the infected as they fought for their lives, the air thick with the stench of blood and death. In the midst of the chaos, they witnessed a horrifying sight, a woman being consumed by a horde of infected, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. "We have to keep moving," Damien shouted over the din, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of screams. But just as it seemed their time had run out, salvation came in the form of the captain, and a group of crew members. With weapons drawn, they fought off the infected, their swift and decisive action saving Alona, Clay, and Damien from certain death. "Quickly this way," the captain shouted, gesturing towards the safety of the bridge. With newfound hope coursing through their veins, Alona, Clay, and Damien followed the captain and his crew, their steps quickening as they drew closer to their destination. As they finally reached the bridge, relief washed over them like a tidal wave. Though the battle was far from over, they knew that they were one step closer to safety, thanks to the bravery and quick thinking of the captain and his crew. But as they caught their breath and took stock of their surroundings, they knew that the true test of their survival still lay ahead. For aboard the Seafarer, danger lurked around every corner, and the fight for survival was far from over. Chapter 7. Decision Point. On the bridge, amidst the chaos echoing through the ship, the captain relayed the grim reality of their situation. Alona, Clay, and Damien listened intently as he outlined their options. "We can head for the mainland," the captain suggested, his voice grim but resolute. "Seek help, medical attention, anything that might aid us in this crisis." Damien's brow furrowed with concern. "But what if we bring the sickness with us? What if we're responsible for spreading it further?" Alona's expression was thoughtful. "The mainland may already be infected. We've heard the radio chatter, it could be everywhere." Clay interjected, his voice tinged with urgency. "Regardless, the ship isn't safe. We need to get off it now." The captain considered their words carefully before turning to his first mate. "What do you suggest, Mr. Jenkins?" The first mate hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the group assembled on the bridge. "We could head towards the coast, sir, get as close as possible, then use rowboats to make our way inland." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and a nurse stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "In the worst-case scenario, the virus will burn itself out. It's overworking the infected, after all." The captain nodded, his expression determined. "Very well. That's our course of action. Prepare to make for the coast." As the crew sprang into action, preparing for their risky journey to the mainland, Alona, Clay, and Damien exchanged glances, their hearts heavy with the weight of the decision before them. For aboard the Seafarer, the fight for survival raged on, and their fates hung in the balance. Chapter 8. Voyage into Darkness. As the Seafarer steered towards the coast, tension hung thick in the air like a suffocating fog. The ship creaked and groaned under the strain of the journey, its hull battered by the relentless waves. Below deck, the infected roamed like rabid beasts, their primal screams reverberating through the metal corridors. Alona, Clay, and Damien huddled together, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of danger. "We need to stick together," Alona whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of chaos around them. Clay nodded, his grip tightening on the makeshift weapon he held. "Agreed, we can't let them catch us off guard." Damien's eyes darted nervously around the dimly lit corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. "Just keep moving, we'll find a way out of this." Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking horror, and every sound sent shivers down their spines. They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the oppressive atmosphere of dread that surrounded them. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the corridor, causing them to freeze in their tracks. They turned to see a young crew member named Sarah being dragged into the darkness by a pack of infected. "Oh my God!" Alona gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Clay's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the grisly scene unfold before him. "We have to do something!" But before they could react, Sarah's screams were silenced by the ravenous horde, her body disappearing into the writhing mass of infected flesh. "We have to keep moving," Damien shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "There's nothing we can do for her now." In the heart of the chaos, the captain and his crew battled against the tide of madness, their shouts lost amidst the deafening roar of the infected. But just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a glimmer of light pierced the darkness. The first mate's plan had worked, and the rowboats were ready for launch. With a desperate cry, Alona, Clay, and Damien made a dash for the safety of the boats, their hearts pounding in their chests as they fought to escape the clutches of the infected horde. As they rowed toward the safety of the coastline, a sense of relief washed over them like a tidal wave. But amidst the jubilation, a lingering fear remained. For aboard the Seafarer, The nightmare was far from over, and the true horrors that awaited them on the mainland were yet to be revealed. Chapter 9: City of Despair. As the Seafarer approached the coast, the group's hopes for safety soared. They scanned the horizon eagerly, searching for signs of civilization. Finally, a coastal city came into view, its streets seemingly deserted in the fading light of dusk. "We're almost there," Alona breathed, a glimmer of relief in her eyes, but their sense of security was short-lived. As they neared the city, a deafening explosion shattered the quiet, sending shockwaves of fear rippling through the group. "What was that?" Damien exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. Alona's heart raced as they rushed towards the source of the explosion, their footsteps echoing through the empty streets. But what they found was far from the refuge they had hoped for. The city was in chaos. Riots erupted in every corner, flames engulfed buildings, and the infected roamed unchecked through the streets. The mob surged like a tidal wave of madness and blood, consuming everything in its path. "We have to get out of here," Clay shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of chaos around them. But before they could flee, tragedy struck. In the chaos of the mob, Clay was caught, his screams drowned out by the cacophony of violence around them. The group watched in horror as he was torn apart by the infected, his blood staining the pavement. "We have to go now," Damien urged, his voice hoarse with grief. With tears streaming down their faces, the group fled towards the rowboat, their hearts heavy with sorrow. But the infected were relentless, their primal hunger driving them ever closer. As they rowed desperately towards the Seafarer, the infected gave chase, their frenzied screams echoing across the water. With every stroke of the oar, the group fought to keep the infected at bay, kicking and thrashing against the relentless tide of madness and death. Finally, they reached the safety of the ship, their bodies bruised and battered, their hearts heavy with loss. But as they looked out over the city, consumed by flames and chaos, they knew that their journey was far from over. And as we return to the safety of our reality, let us remain vigilant, for the shadows may conceal more than we could ever imagine. Subscribe today and embrace the darkness with us.